Welcome to our chat today with Colette McKinnon. And just a little bit of intro for Colette. She just recently completed the last course needed to be classified as a master gardener, and she's been gardening her whole life. And we are really excited to have her here to talk about soil and compost, since it's pretty well the perfect time of year to really start thinking about how important and foundational compost and soil is to the success of your garden. So I am going to pass it back over to Colette, and you can take it away. Oh, sorry. Okay, I will say, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and then I will be forwarding them onto Colette at the end, where we will answer any questions submitted.
Okay, so I'm going to just share the screen here and get the presentation up. Hopefully. Okay, and we'll do start. So is that good? Can you see that well, Julie?
That looks great. If you want to just, yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right. So thank you everybody for coming. I guess soil and compost is a unusual subject, but it's pretty critical and foundational to the garden, as I have learned as I've gone along. So what I'm going to share with you in this little while is first talk about soil and what it's made up of, just as a context. And then the second part of the talk, I look at compost and different ways you can amend the soil to have more success in your garden. You'll see there's lots of complexity here, and I'll do the best I can, but with gardening, as with most other fields, you never stop learning. So first of all, what is soil, or what's in it? It's interesting to know that a quarter of it is water, a quarter of it is air, 40% of it is minerals, and 10% of it is organic matter. So if we look at the minerals are basically broken down bits of rock. And for us as gardeners, what's important is the texture of this rock. So you can get sand, which is the biggest particle, and then silt. And clay is the smallest, and it's more like a plate than flat. And that affects the soil and how it impacts on your growing. So if you look at the differences in texture or the different mineral compositions, they influence the pore space. So you can imagine between sand particles, there's a lot more space, clay particles, not so much. Depending on that, it also affects how easily soil is composted, how fast it warms up in the spring, how much water it absorbs and retains, and the chemical charge. So depending on your mineral composition, some soils hold and retain nutrients better than others. So again, if we look at the different types of soil, on the yellow column, there's the sandy soil, and on the other extreme is the clay soil, and in the middle, I've got the just right loamy soil. So sandy soil doesn't have much structure. If you pick up a handful of sand on the beach, it just falls apart. And then if you think from the opposite extreme is the clay soil, you can kind of squish it together and it makes a ball. So it is vulnerable to being compacted, and it may cause drainage problems. Then if you look at the nutrients and fertility of a sandy soil, so with sandy soil, nutrients aren't stored so much or so easily there, so you have to provide them more frequently as the plants need them, and it tends to be acidic. If you look at clay soil, it is full of nutrients, but if it's wet, it can cause problem with availability of the nutrients, and it tends to be alkaline. And of course, in the middle, we've got the lovely crumbly soil with the organic matter, it's a living soil. It holds nutrients, and it continuously releases nutrients. So that's where we're aiming for. Two important concepts when you're looking at soil are the texture of soil and the structure of soil. Texture is the amount of sand, silt, or clay in your soil. And whatever you have, you can't change. That's it. You got sandy soil, you're going to have it. You got clay soil, you're going to have it. Structure of soil is more about the way the individual particles stick together. And so an ideal soil feels soft and crumbly or friable, and these crumbs that you have are known as aggregates. If you think of making a cake and you've got it nice and crumbly and a bit sticks together, that's how it should look. So we can change the structure of our soil, and that's where we're going to aim with our composting. And yep, so that's it. We can change the structure of our soil, and the way we do it is by adding organic matter. So I'm going to go back to that first picture that we had. So only 10% of the soil that we have, if we look at a piece of soil or a part of soil, is organic matter. And another interesting thing to know about that is of that organic matter, only 5% is alive, and the rest is in some different stage of decomposition. So if you add organic matter, you provide food and water and shelter for a living soil. And a living soil is one that's continually changing and breaking down and providing food and nutrients for plants. So the living soil will feed plants by constantly consuming and excreting nutrients. All these little living things in the soil do that. And it also creates a rich ecosystem to protect the garden from pests and diseases. So a living soil controls the flow of nutrients and water to garden plants, primarily through the activity of soil organisms. It releases nutrients to plants by shredding, grazing, and digesting organic matter. Nitrogen-fixing rhizobium bacteria live on roots of the bee family and pull nitrogen from the air into the soil. So there's a bacteria that's useful in the soil among many. There's a fungi called mycorrhizal fungi, and that develops beneficial relationships with the plant roots and increases their length and improves water and phosphorus delivery. So soil is not something that's just dead, or a soil that's helpful for our garden. Is something that's very much alive, and it's got a whole ecosystem going. And part of what happens with that is that supports our plants. So the single solution to providing food, shelter, and water and air for a living soil is organic matter. So what is organic matter? So that is anything living or anything that is dead that was once living. So the most important thing, of course, when you're adding organic matter is you don't want to add anything that contains toxins to your soil. And you want to aim for a sustainable system. So in the beginning, you have to help your garden along a little bit, but you want to develop over time one that recycles water and nutrients and other resources. So you want it to be kind of like a sponge, but organic matter is continually lost, so you do need to replenish it. And in nature, if you just look at a forest, the leaves fall, they stay on the ground, they decompose, and they feed the trees. So there is a cycle that is continuous and self-sustaining right there. In our yards, we don't always have that set up. So some practices that add organic matter, well, basically it is any practice that returns organic material to the soil. I'm going to talk a little bit about cover crops and green manure. We don't hear so much about that, especially in the garden context, but I think it's useful to know. The one that we usually think about is where you make compost with compost bins and so on. I'll talk about that. And then you could get chickens, and briefly I'll talk about that at the end. But all these things will add organic matter to your soil. So what are cover crops? It's basically any living ground cover that you plant. And what it does is protect the soil from erosion. It reduces water runoff. It reduces the risk of or suppresses weeds, insects, and disease. It enhances the soil structure and stability. There's a diverse habitat there for soil organisms, beneficial insects, and above ground pollinators. And it also increases the microbial populations and preserves soil nutrients. So cover crops or any ground cover is really much better than a bare patch of soil. And it's helpful and important for your garden. So examples of how to use cover crops here are as green manure. as living mulch or as residue mulch. So basically, you grow a plant and then you plow it under. And the reason you're growing it is so that it can feed your soil. And there are different kinds of manure, green manures that you can use. Some are a high nitrogen cover crop, and that decomposes quickly and fertilizes the garden. So, you can buy fertilizer with nitrogen. If you plant these, you could eliminate the need for this fertilizer. Basically, nitrogen fixing plants are like the ones that have like you think of a pea pod, that kind of a pod structure on them, and they tend to be nitrogen fixing and helpful to your garden. Non-legume crops, which are nitrogen fixing, these ones scavenge and recycle excess soil nutrients left at the end of the growing season. So they sort of collect everything up, bring it to the surface so your new plants can use it. Living roots are also very important. So it's not only what's on top of the soil, but what's in the soil that's important. They add a massive amount of organic material below ground, and they constantly leak sugars, which is a hot spot for living soil activity. So you want to have these roots in the ground. And large roots and root system can break up compacted or clay soil. So they kind of till the soil for you. You don't have to do it yourself. So if you have a living mulch, it suppresses weeds by blocking the sun. If the ground cover, you don't want it to compete with your other plants. It's going to be able to grow in the shade. It's going to be low growing. Residue mulches are basically leaving your cover crop on the soil as mulch. So it limits seed germination and enhances weed seed predation by insects. It provides a place for them to live and eat the insects that are there. So when you plant your cover crop, it's just like planting any other crop. You can't just throw your seeds on the ground and hope they grow. You have to prepare the bed, you have to water, and you have to weed it as established. But a lot of them grow really quickly, so it makes it a little easier. And you can use one or a combination of plants. So some examples, you can try and grow crops that will fix nitrogen. I've got some examples here like clover and beans. You can grow them between crop rotations in the warm season, like buckwheat and some others there. You can grow them over winter, like rye and oats, and they will, their roots in the ground will keep the soil there and prevent it from running off. You can improve compact soil by growing things like forage, radish, and of course they attract pollinators if you have flowering forbs. So it's a whole field that you can go into very, if you want to, and read up a lot about it. And these things can really help your garden. Even if you've got a small vegetable garden, you can buy seed to put in there. Or if you want to establish a new bed somewhere, you can start off by enriching it and then plant your new plant. So the important thing about the crops is that you actually have to kill them to get the nutrients. So it's not like planting flowers that you want to see the beautiful results of, or fruit that you're going to, or vegetables you're going to harvest. So when you plant them, you do need to read up about them. But if you want nitrogen, you need to kill them just as they begin to bud, like cut them then. You also need to avoid letting the crop go to seed because the nutrient quality suffers and many become weeds. That's because they grow so quickly, so they'll keep coming up. So if you cut them before, then you're good. And the timing, of course, depends on when you're going to plant your next crop, a vegetable crop or whatever. And the residues from these should stay in the soil for 2 weeks before planting. So you may plant buckwheat, cut it down, and wait 2 weeks, and then plant your next crop, just to let it break down a bit. Now, okay, other ways that we've talked about to build organic matter is to compost in place or build a separate compost system. So these are what we usually talk about. When you compost in place, you don't have to disturb the soil. There's already a living ecosystem under there. You can just leave it and build on it. So if you can use it to cover the soil as mulch and suppress weeds and retain water. So if you put straw over your vegetable garden or your newly planted garden, for example, that can work. It's not always it doesn't always look as nice as you might want. And another thing to keep your soil so spring or plants to grow. Sheet composting you may have heard of. That's like another term is lasagna gardening, but it's basically putting layers of organic matter down and allowing them to decompose. So you build directly on the soil surface. So you put it on, the worms and other organisms come up from deep below and they incorporate the new compost until the soil and improve the structure. When you're doing this, each layer you should do 2 to 6 inches. So for a total of 1 foot to 18 inches in your pile. You do add kitchen scraps, manure, chopped green or brown yard debris, coffee grounds, grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves. Those are all good things to put in, but don't put weeds in if they've gone to seed. And others that spread by the rhizomes, you know, the ones with the roots and they pop up and they go across and they pop up in the next. If you have those in your compost, unless you made it very hot, they're going to keep coming up. Then finish the top with a bulky mulch like shredded leaves or straw. And you want to keep the layers moist so that the compost can continue to develop. Over time, the pile will shrink as it decomposes. So if you've got thicker layers, they heat up more, and thinner layers, but they also decompose quicker, and thinner layers decompose more slowly, but don't heat up as much. So if you've got thicker layers and you want to plant in them, you may want to put plants that like the heat, like squash or tomatoes in the early summer. And if you have thinner layers, the heat's not going to affect your plants, or you just wait for them to decompose. But this type of composting doesn't produce enough heat to kill seeds and pathogens. Trench composting is another thing you could do. You dig a hole in the ground, you bury organic material. You can put it near the root zone of where plants need nutrients. It does take longer to decompose when you bury it. You may have to wait months or a year before planting in the trench. And then you cover it with soil so you don't get smell or pests. And it's simplest to dig a hole 8 to 12 inches deep, add your kitchen scraps and cover with soil. That's sort of another thing to do as you transition or as you enrich your soil. Another way is, we call it lop it and leave it, but basically you cut organic material and just leave it where it falls. And if you chop it up smaller, of course, it decomposes quicker. So examples are with your grass clippings. Don't rake them up, just leave them where they fall. Deciduous tree leaves, don't rake and bag and haul them, just pull them under your orchard or tree. Just make sure they're not right up against the trunk to prevent root rot. So leave 2 or 3 inches away from your trunk. Weeds can be mulch as long as you catch them before they go to seed. And again, remember, don't use the ones that reproduce from stems because they will sort of grow wherever you put them. Or you could chop plants at the end of the growing season, allow them to compost in place. And if there's some woody stems, you can chip and split them, bury them a little bit, and just leave them in the soil. So that's another way to build organic matter in your soil. So some compost basics that are important to know is a compost pile is a living pile. So it needs food, which is your organic matter, water, shelter, and air. So one part of when you're making, you may have had your compost sitting there and it just doesn't decompose and it maybe gets a bit smelly and you're wondering what's going on. But basically, one of the important things is to put some green and some brown material and mix it up in your compost bin. So the green material is high in nitrogen, the brown is high in carbon. And the green material they talk about, so if you had a big pile of maybe leaves, you could add some kitchen scraps in between. If you don't have lots of nitrogen, you can add nitrogen fertilizer like blood meal or fish emulsion. It also needs water. so the microbes can be active, but it can't be squishy, waterlogged. So you have to, it feels like a wrung out sponge. So you can cover it with the top so it doesn't dry out. So it's kind of something you have to tend for it to decompose at a fairly rapid rate. If you erase the pile and turn it, it prevents smells too. And temperature is important. I mean, now in the winter, nothing's really happening in our compost. Another thing is the size of the pile. So 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet is a good size to make sure that decomposition is happening in your pile. Hot composting is an intensive process, and this produces a good quality compost in a short time. What's good about it is it eliminates pests and pathogens and weed seeds, but it's difficult to do at home. To keep the temperature high is difficult. You should also make sure not to put debris with herbicides because it will concentrate in the compost. The temperature you have to get to is between 120 to 150 Fahrenheit, and to kill weed seed, it should reach 145. So that's pretty hot. So the size, the ratio of green to brown material, and the moisture levels are important. So, and then once the pile heats and cools once every week, and when it doesn't heat, when you turn it ready for the garden. To do this, you would have to read out more carefully about how to put your ratios of green to brown material and the size and things like that. So it takes a little work and a little more research to do this well. Leaf mold is another wonderful way to make compost, and it's easy. So leaves from deciduous trees, you can just shred them if you want, or just pile them in a 3 by 3 by 3 foot composter like that wire one you see in the picture. Slightly moisten it as you go. Just let it sit in your yard, cover it, and add moisture as needed. And it's ready to use after 6 months, up to a year. And if you want to increase decomposition speed, turn it. Why is leaf mold good? It's a soil conditioner. It improves the soil condition, the soil structure, the water holding capability, and adds nutrients and builds organic matter. So leaf mold, which we have all around us, is a wonderful thing to use in your garden. You can use manures. They provide lots of nutrients, micro and macro, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. And they also provide organic matter, but the quality varies. So if you got manure and where there was bedding in, say the animals ate a lot of food was full of weed seed, that will be manure. And also, is it composted or fresh? So you don't want to put fresh manure directly on your plants. You need it to sit for a while and decompose. Otherwise, it can burn. It can also harbor pathogens. So if you let it sit for a while over like the winter, then the pathogens will break down before you use it. It's best to use it in the spring before planting. And if it's fresh, you should apply it 1 month before planting. You can mix it into planting holes for shrubs and trees, or use it as mulch around shrubs. And it serves as a good green material if you're doing sheet composting. So one of your layers there could be manure. And if you want to reduce the risk of pathogens, use the hot composting method. We can all have chickens now in our suburban gardens. So if you have a suburban garden, or if you live in the country, get some chickens. What you want to do is, if you can, put them in a little chicken tractor, move them around the lawn over time, and their poop adds nutrients and it doesn't damage the grass. So you don't want it crammed full with chickens, but a few chickens, and you keep moving around, that will work. In garden beds, if you let them there, they add manure, they clean up residues, reduce insect pests, and they lightly till the soil with their scratching. And manure just in general can harbor pathogens, so just wait a little bit before you're planting in freshly fertilized soil, especially if you're going to eat the vegetables. Another composting method is worm composting, which I won't go into now, but that's something you can do indoors in a box in the winter using shredded paper or and your scraps from your kitchen and some earthworms, and gradually they work through the pile make it into compost, which you can then keep and use in your garden. It makes really good compost. So what I want to do here is talk about just finally the general principles. So a soil is a living thing. So that's why I have here general principles for the soil grower. Use what you have. So instead of bagging leaves, add them back to the garden as mulch, for example. Losses occur through harvesting, weeding, mowing, and tilling. So replenish your soil. The roots below the ground add even more organic matter to soil than the crops above the ground. So growing cover crops and green manure is some of the best ways to amend your soil. And soil is a diverse ecosystem, so you need a diverse garden, different plants, rotations, and additions. So it's really alive, and just like any living system, diversity is always stronger and richer and more resilient. Living soil prefers a sustainable food supply over time rather than feast and famine. So you can't just leave your compost there. Well, you can and ignore it and then come back later. It will just really speed up the process if you tend to your compost. Everything does break down over time and you can just leave it. But if you want to keep your soil alive and well, you need it to sustain it. Disturbing less is a good idea. So tilling, bare soil, pesticides, both organic and conventional, disturb living soil because there are living organisms in there, and they got a little house and a whole setup going there. If you interfere with it, you do disturb them. Never till wet soils because they will compact. Especially if it's clay. So clay is a challenge like that. Keep soil covered with mulch or decaying organic matter or living plants. And that's pretty much it. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions now, I will do my best to answer them.
Okay, so Colette, Teresa asked, do you grow any wild? I'm not sure if maybe you haven't finished typing that. So, okay, sorry, here we go. Here's the rest of the question.
Okay.
I'll just wait for her to type it.
Okay. Any wild plants? Okay, what do you mean? Are you thinking native plants, Teresa? Mustard. I'm not sure what you mean. She's asking, do I grow any wild plants? For example, mustard. Oh, native plants. Yes, actually, I have a lot of a property that doesn't have much. It was a farm field, so there's not much growing on it. And one of the big things I am trying to do is develop a sort of a native area. And the first thing I did, because my soil is very rocky and difficult to work with, is try to amend it. And I am starting to plant native plants in it. So with this, there's always learning. And for me, some of the plants that I've planted have grown really well, and some of them the rabbits have eaten. Boom. So I'm going to have to go back to my drawing board again and try to find native plants that will survive the rabbits. But yes, I am growing them, and it's a very good idea for many reasons, because it supports the native fauna, and it's good. Wild plants that grow in farmers' fields. I don't know. Maybe can Teresa unmute and we can. I'm not sure what.
I was just going to say that. I was just wondering. Like you can eat a lot of the weeds that we consider weeds that grow, in the farmers' fields and such. And that's what I'm just wondering if you're, growing any of the weeds that are edible, which you might have had in your farmer's field.
Yeah. I haven't. Well, dandelions are. I mean, I think you can do all sorts of things with dandelions, and also I'm really bad with names of flowers. The ones with the yellow at the top, and their name is escaping me now. but I'm not growing them on purpose. What I'm doing is trying to build up a little garden of native plants, and so I'm bringing those in. Are you growing any plants like that, Teresa?
Unfortunately, I don't have a spot right now to garden, but I have in the past planted gardens, and I found, excuse me, native plants are one of the best because they don't take any care and they don't take any water or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. You just have to match the plant to the site. You're absolutely right.
and I was reading interesting, like wild mustard and such, that if we ate stuff like that, it might not be so invasive.
Oh, you're thinking of garlic mustard, right? That's
probably the one, yeah, because apparently like in Europe they eat a lot of the what we consider weeds and wild plants and invasive, and we could be eating this stuff.
You're right, we can. There's always balancing acts, because I know with wild mustard, it alters the composition of the soil and makes it unpleasant for many other plants to grow there, like native plants. So, and it spreads really quickly, so it can colonize an area, and then it reduces the growing area for our native plants. But on the other hand, you can eat it. So maybe if we eat enough of it, we can reduce its spread, and it could be useful as well. It's always good to try and find uses for plants that grow so well, but unfortunately they do have drawbacks sometimes too. So it's a balancing act.
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, but I know this has really made me, I've got a big and new raised garden bed. So this has made me very excited to pick my foundation. How do I want to build my foundation? So I'll do one last call for questions. If anyone wants to either unmute and ask, or you can put it in the chat. Please do so. I'm just going to take a quick peek at the Facebook live stream and see if there's any questions popping up there. So I'm not seeing any. Okay, well, thank you so much, Colette. That was really informative, and thank you to the submitted questions. The conversation around native plants particularly is wonderful, and you're right. I think it ties in really well to, if anyone caught the last Master Gardeners presentation we had, which was about having a beautiful garden with less work, that native plants definitely play into that. So thank you, Colette, so much for helping us build on this spring series. And it was really informative. And everyone, a reminder that if you do want to catch any of the information again, this talk will be on our YouTube channel, which you can access on YouTube by searching the County of Prince Edward Public Library. And we will have it as a playlist and on the main page. So if you have any other questions, though, that do come up, please feel free to contact us at the library, and we will make sure that Colette gets your questions if you happen to think of it later. Okay, do you have anything else you'd like to end off with, Colette?
No, thank you for listening, and good luck with your garden, and enjoy it.
Perfect. All right, thank you all so much for coming.
Okay, bye-bye.